bad management damages more than just work culture. It damages work culture, employee quality of life, and customer relationships, and it obliterates productivity and your bottom line. However, here's the thing. Management is actually a very noble calling, capable of creating immeasurable value to your company, contributing to a functioning modern society. From the Soar Studios, this is the Uplift Humanity podcast. I'm Justin Brady, and today I'm joined with Richard Straub, Executive Director of the Global Peter Drucker Forum. Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Great pleasure.
Now, are you talking to me from Vienna today, or where's the Peter Drucker Forum studios, I should ask?
Yes, Justin, I'm talking today from Vienna, but I'm not always in Vienna. It's a global forum, and I'm spending some time in Paris, some time in Vienna, and of course, some time traveling when the circumstances allow.
I think we should start here because not everybody, I think every manager should certainly be at least aware of Peter Drucker, but not everybody is. So let's start very broadly, and then we'll work into what the forum is, how you're related to it, and all those other things. But who was Peter Drucker from a very broad view?
Peter Drucker is often called the father of modern management. He was born in Vienna, and this is the reason why I'm involved, because we found out some time ago that 2009 would be his 100th birthday. And he was born in Vienna, but then left Austria and left Europe to land in the US. So he's known rather as a US management thinker than a European management thinker. But the fact is that he grew up here in Austria and specifically in Vienna. And I think what most people, certainly of my generation, of the baby boomer generation and some of the X generation, would associate with Peter Drucker is the fundamental ideas of modern management.
So, I think a lot of people think that Peter Drucker was just always this management business guy for his entire professional career, but that's not actually the case. Before he was this respected management leader, he was also a philosopher and a political historian. So how did he make his way into being the father of modern management?
Yeah, he said this very, very explicitly, that he didn't start with any interest in management. First he said, well, I didn't know much about it, but I had no interest. But my interest in society led me to the importance of management. He understood when he looked in how a modern society works. And when I say modern society, I mean in the sense of Peter Drucker, a society which is primarily constituted by organizations and institutions.
Right.
Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions worldwide, right? And based on this idea, how do these organizations perform and contribute value ultimately to society? That was a key question for him. But he started with his interest, how can a modern society work?
And eventually he got into the management field, right? So what was the catalyst that, and maybe you don't know this, but do you know the catalyst and what got him from philosopher and political historian into management? What was the thing that pushed him into that?
The interesting thing was that, we are talking now about the late 30s of the last century and the early 40s, right? It's quite a while ago. But after he had published his first book, which has the title The End of Economic Man, and this was published in 1939, and it's really analysis of the rise of totalitarianism, which was the huge challenge last century. And if you think about 1939, you know what I'm talking about. After he had published that, he was already in the US, and he got interest from an organization, from a top executive who read his work and who also saw his second book, which was The Future of Industrial Men. And this top executive of a very important company said, well, I would like to have this young guy, Peter Drucker, who was just, 30 years and slightly beyond 30 years. I would like to have him join us for a certain period and to watch how a modern corporation works. So he was invited by Alfred Sloan to shadow General Motors executives and to be part in some way of the organization, to be part of meetings, to listen in, to watch how the corporation works. Because Alfred Sloan saw, especially in his second book, The Future of Industrial Men, that Drucker had ideas about what the industrial society of the future should be.
Yeah, and I want to get into here in a little bit about like modern technology, modern management, and how what Peter Drucker was advocating for and teaching way back then is still very applicable today. And people, modern managers are still struggling with this stuff. But before I ask that, who are a few famous folks people might recognize that are carrying on Peter Drucker's principles and ideas? Obviously, you have the Global Peter Drucker Forum, and that's quite famous. But what are some other maybe of his disciples that we would know about?
I mean, there are many, of course, and it's always difficult to pick one. But one who comes to my mind as one of the foremost management thinkers who has also directly worked with Peter Drucker, and that's an important element, is Jim Collins. Yeah, Jim Collins has been, in a way, and I think he says it himself, a disciple of Peter Drucker. And then you have executives, a lot of executives, who have been at least close to his thinking. We had, as an example, at the recent Drucker Forum, one of our partners is Fujitsu, and the CEO of Fujitsu also, he's younger. He hasn't worked with Peter Drucker, but the amazing thing is that in Japan, Peter Drucker is still known as he was alive, right? He's still present. Even more than, I must say, even more than in the US and more than in Europe.
Really? Huh.
So, yeah, that's not known, but this is a fact. I mean, I can also say as an anecdote that I know it from the family, from Doris Drucker, who was, as long as she was alive, she was very close to the Drucker Forum. And Doris told us that the most books sold were actually in Japan for Peter Drucker.
I had no idea. That's absolutely fascinating. And I should obviously point out Jim Collins, who, if people are telling themselves, I know that name. Yeah, it's because Jim Collins wrote Good to Great. Most people are very familiar with Good to Great. I think Clayton Christensen was on kind of a similar path, right?
Yes. I mean, in the Drucker Forum, we are privileged to have quite a number of the most important management thinkers, involved. And as you will know, sadly, Clay passed away 2 years ago.
Right.
But he was a great supporter, and he was deeply involved, as was C.K. Prahalad, right? Some of these legends, if you will, and Charles Handy. And Clay had his own theories on management. So no, I think we wouldn't expect that anybody is just, sort of rehashing the theories and the ideas of Peter Drucker. But what they are doing is they are standing in some way on his shoulders. Yeah, those great management thinkers are standing on his shoulders and are developing their own new ideas, like Clay did with disruptive innovation.
Managers have a lot more impact than we realize, and we tend to view them kind of as this, and I shouldn't say we, but I think there is a general idea that managers are just this necessary, obnoxious aspect of corporations and businesses. And, we see like Peter, what's his name? We see Michael Scott on The Office, kind of the epitome of bad management and obnoxious management. And we have books about bad bosses. And when we're at home, we make fun of our bosses and say, my boss is really riding me and my manager is really bothering me. And sadly, like the word manager in some circles is kind of a scary word. So here's the question for you. Like, isn't the manager one of the most noble callings out there, like I alluded to earlier?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, if it's rightly understood and rightly exercised, it is exactly that. But this is, I think, where Peter Drucker can really help, because Peter Drucker puts management in the center of society in some way. He says they have a huge responsibility. He doesn't just say, well, it's an important job, an important role. No, there's a real responsibility, because in modern societies, and I should always say, we are not only talking about business management, we're talking about all organizations, right? Think about hospitals, think about football clubs, think about culture institutions, etc. So the managers are the ones who make it work, who enable their teams to achieve performance. And that's also something where Drucker left no doubt. Management is not about just being nice and being good. It's about achieving performance, and achieving performance in a humane way. You shouldn't do it just by being tough. But on the other hand, you cannot afford, if you have a team that cannot perform in a certain environment. So the manager has the responsibility to put people where they can perform. And that's a very difficult role. And in some way, given the importance, what they produce, the value, the outcome for society, if rightly understood.
I want to go back really just a few seconds to what you said there, because you said it as if it's just normal and everyone understands the value, but it's really easy to miss. You said, and I'm going to misquote you, we can go back and listen to the audio later, but in essence, great people, good managers, great managers put people where they best can perform. And I think that is often misunderstood about management. It's not about controlling others and getting them to hit results. It's actually about identifying their unique strengths and making sure they're in the best position to perform well.
Yes. I mean, in this context, one also needs to understand Drucker's ideas on the knowledge society, because one of his main books is the post-industrial society. And in the post-industrial society, he describes the transition from the industrial society to the knowledge society. And one of the characteristics of the knowledge society is what he calls the knowledge worker. The knowledge worker is different than a pure clerk, because the clerk received the precise instructions and had to do something. The knowledge worker, the great difference is that they know better than even the manager what they should do, what the task is, and how they can solve problems. This means in our time, more and more, a manager should not even try to know better than the knowledge workers, but he or she must make sure that the knowledge workers have the opportunity to perform. And he, the manager cannot just find out by himself or herself what the strengths of a particular knowledge worker are. This is a bit of a dialogue. So in Drucker's ideas, this task is finding in an interactive way. For example, when you set objectives, find out what are really the strengths of this person. When you set objectives and when you see if they are achieved, because you will probably know that the idea of management by objectives came from Peter Drucker.
Yeah, I mean, one of the tools I always turn to understand my own strengths and understand other people's strengths is the Strengths Finder. That really dynamically helped me in my own leadership. But one of the other things I want to get to is where are some areas you see in modern management? You see current managers doing this. And if Peter Drucker were still here, he would probably go crazy and he'd maybe step in and say a few words. Do you see any trends, any areas right now in the modern workplace that would bug him a little bit?
Yeah, there's quite a lot happening, and I mean, in the current crisis, it's even getting a bit worse in some ways. But Peter Drucker would be very clear that while you can do a lot with digital technology, when you have firmly the human being in the center of your endeavor and of your, of the way how you operate, then you see also clear limits, what technology can do. Yeah. And I see two areas there. One is the way how we work cannot be done just without personal contact. I think he would be very firm on that. You can complement it. You can have new ways of working, but there is no way that you can replace the human interaction and the building of trust that is happening in informal settings, but still in settings where you discuss things that are relevant for the business or for the specific organization. This cannot be replaced by technology, and especially when it comes to conflicts. Yeah, when it comes to conflicts, to difficult situations, try to solve them via Skype or via Zoom. Yeah, that's very difficult. And the other area where Drucker would have a very clear opinion is what can you expect in terms of intelligence from these systems? We use this unfortunate term of artificial intelligence, right? I think he would agree. It's a very unfortunate term. He said it right from the beginning. The computer is immoral. And I think you cannot emphasize this enough, because nobody can expect from the computer by itself to have something which resembles in any way human intelligence, except some very specialized arenas, right? And we know what they are, where you work with big data, where you find patterns, etc., where you can apply algorithms. But most of the interesting things in management are dealing with uncertainty. And in uncertainty, you don't get anything other than some base information from these systems. So he would still say today, despite all hype around artificial intelligence, the computer is immoral.
That's fascinating. So what do you think you would say, one of the more recent developments, the technology's been around for a while, but with the remote work and the whole pandemic thing, one of the things that drove me a little crazy, and I feel like Peter Drucker would have something to say on this, was all this keyboard monitoring. Like there's all these keystroke monitors that people are installing into computers so managers can make sure people are actually working in their keyboard. And then going back into the workplace, some companies have installed uncomfortable toilet seats to keep staff out of the bathrooms and not wasting time. What do you think he'd have to say about this stuff?
Yeah, he would say this is totally unacceptable, because the idea, let me come back to this notion of the knowledge worker. What Drucker, he was the first one really to take this up and to show what does it mean, what is the modern knowledge worker. And one of the characteristics is the autonomy that they have and they should have, right? They should be able, because they should not be into a narrow sort of framework, controlled, etc. They should be accountable for results. But how they do it, they know it better than the manager. And so all systems which try to put people under tight control and monitor and micromanage them are bad. There's no question about that, especially when it comes to knowledge work. And most of our work today is knowledge work. So Peter Drucker, and I think all thinkers who are in some way inspired by him, would absolutely reject this type of industrial age Tayloristic type of controls.
That's very true. You nailed it. It is absolutely Tayloristic, and probably should get into Taylorism in another episode. But so let's move on to the forum a little bit, the Global Peter Drucker Forum. You just completed number 13. You're heading to 14 soon, next year, and of course we'll get into that. But How did the first one start? It's kind of an interesting story. It obviously takes place in Vienna, but the first one started with a relationship with Doris Drucker, and you, of course, were the one who started the first one. Can you go into a little bit of detail on that?
Yeah, the first one started in a funny way. I mean, my wife and I found out, we just by accident, we found out, well, the 100th birthday of Peter Drucker is coming up. Of course, at the time, I didn't have the birthday of Peter Drucker on my mind. But listening to a certain course that he had done, even, in his late years, he has done some internet courses, the first internet courses online. So he was speaking on an early internet course. And in the introduction of this internet course, the speaker always said, Peter Drucker was born in Vienna, November 19, 1909. And we heard that several times, and then we said, wow, 1909 and now 2009. This was in 2006, 2007 that we heard that. And we said, well, in his hometown, Vienna, what would be happening to remember his birthday and his centenary? And then we found out nothing. And so we started to look for to whom could we connect to make something work in Vienna. And this is how we came to the Drucker Institute and ultimately to Doris Drucker, because the decision to really do the big centenary, it was the big important centenary event for Peter Drucker, was happening in Vienna. And Doris took the risk to entrust us, me, my wife, to run it, even though we had never run a conference before. She was convinced we are so passionate about Peter Drucker that it would work out. And she was right.
And so that's your wife, Ilse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you guys, you retired from IBM in 2006, and yes. I think that you guys started these conversations, the Peter Drucker Society of Austria in 2008, and then the first forum happened, like you said, in 2009. And then later, the Peter Drucker Society of Europe was formed in 2010. That ended up running the Global Peter Drucker Forum as it is today, correct? Did I get all that right?
No, it's absolutely right. I think what's also remarkable is that when we started in 2009 with the forum, there was another forum also running, or maybe even two. There was one in Asia, and there was one in the US, which was run by the Drucker Institute. And Doris and the Drucker, after we had completed the Centennial Forum in Vienna, Doris and the Drucker Institute came back to us and said, look, we will stop to run our own forums. We want you to run the Global Peter Drucker Forum in Vienna. And that was the biggest, nod and positive endorsement we could receive. They were just amazed because we ran it in this historical setting in Vienna. And that's very different from some of the conferences you may know, the typical conferences in US hotels. So we thought we must embed it in an environment which is appropriate for Peter Drucker.
And so is it in Vienna every year? Is there ever, except for this year, there was like a virtual component to it. So some people were participating from everywhere else, but it's always in Vienna.
Yes,
that's cool.
We stayed in Vienna. It's, like Davos. Davos is the World Economic Forum since ever. And we do the same. That doesn't mean we don't have other events from time to time in other geographies. Like we have a breakfast event in London, pre-COVID, but we will take it up again. And we may have something in Spain next year. So we are doing smaller events, but they are in some way all in preparation of the Drucker Forum.
So previous speakers, you alluded, or you referenced a few earlier, C.K. Prahlad, Charles Handy, Joseph Massarello, Philip Kotler, Rick Warren. This morning, when I was doing a little bit more research on the Drucker Forum, Ed Catmull was in there, Daniel Pink was in there. Daniel Pink, I believe, was this year. And so how do you go about getting these speakers? How does that whole thing work?
Yeah, I mean, one thing which is also important to understand, the Drucker Forum is a non-profit.
Right.
We are not a for-profit. If you look at our speakers list, you can easily see to bring as many top-level speakers in single conferences, nobody can pay for that. Yeah,
right.
If it's done on a commercial basis, you even cannot bring them together, or you need 10,000 people as an audience, right, to fund it. And this is what we didn't want to do. And by the way, this is also what Doris Drucker requested from us. She said, yes, you can get the name, you can use the name fully, but it must be on a non-profit basis, right?
Sure.
So based on this, we have evolved it from the beginning. And what I observed from the first forum on the name Peter Drucker and the fact that we are not running a commercial operations, that gave us the legitimacy, and also the success, of course, of the first forums. That gave us the legitimacy to sort of attract the best speakers in the world. And we talked already about Clay Christensen, etc. But also we get some of the most important media involved. We have Harvard Business Review since 10 years, basically,
right.
They're involved. But they are really involved. They're engaged, right? So they are publishing a series on the Drucker Forum on hbr.org every year.
Wow.
Right? And we are running joint events. They are publishing, they are running adverts for the Drucker Forum. So, I mean, these are real partnership, or the Financial Times, or with key players from The Economist. So it evolved over the years. And now I think, what I find most rewarding, and it happens sometimes, when I ask a speaker, would you be interested to speak at the Drucker Forum? And they respond, oh, it would be an honor.
Right.
Then I think, okay, that's good. No, it has a certain reputation now.
Absolutely. So there have been 13 of them. And of course, this one had a virtual component. And next year will be 14. And I want to ask you the theme, because you have a theme for all of them. But first, like I told you earlier, while I was preparing, I found talks from Ed Catmull, Pixar, and Dan Pink. And he's, of course, a New York Times bestselling author of When to Sell is Human, Drive a Whole New Mind. He actually talks about knowledge work and the work culture in A Whole New Mind. That's one of my favorites he wrote. And I'm actually have a call with him tomorrow, so it was a perfect timing. And there are a lot of Global Peter Drucker video archives. And I was able to find these really, really fast because Global Peter Drucker Forum uses Soar's deep search feature. So why did you sign up briefly, and what excites you most about giving this experience to all your members?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the most important, let's say the driving factor is that we have an outstanding database of video footage. I think there will not be many organizations who can come close to what we have, given all these great thinkers who have come to the Drucker Forum over the last 13 years. And the challenge is, how do you work with it? How can you really use it? That's the big challenge. We had this archive for quite a while, and we found that even our members who are interested and who are engaged, they had difficulties to leverage it. And I think a capability where you can put in a search term, something you just need because you want to better understand how to deal with complexity and to what extent you can use artificial intelligence to solve some of these issues. With this type of search capabilities, you can actually precisely find what you need. And I think that's an enormously valuable capability.
Yeah, I completely agree. And all that's available at soar.com for those interested in signing up. Richard Straub, Executive Director of the Global Peter Drucker Forum. Before I let you go, can you tell us what number 14 is and what the theme is?
Yes. I mean, we announced it at the end of the 13th forum, and we called it, the title is Performance That Matters, with a subtitle, Sparking the Entrepreneurial Spirit. So you can a bit hear that there is a reference to some of the things we discussed on this interview, like the importance of performance, but not just abstract performance, but performance that matters.
Yes.
Value creation that's important for society. And on the other hand, the other point is about this entrepreneurial component that is needed more than ever in a society where you will need more innovation, not just from startups, because everybody thinks entrepreneurs,
right.
These are startups and, people who run their... No, it's also within companies. You need the entrepreneurial spirit.
That's so true.
And that's what it's all about.
Richard Straub, Executive Director of the Global Peter Drucker Forum, thank you so much for joining me and helping me uplift humanity.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
And thank you so much for joining me and listening. Hey, before I let you go, wouldn't it be really cool if you could upload all your video and like magic, the entire video was searchable by keyword. You just put any keyword, any key phrase, and you're immediately taken to the exact timestamp and exact word or phrase that you typed in. Like all your video. Wouldn't that be kind of cool? Well, let me blow your mind. It exists. It's called deep search technology. It looks beyond descriptions and tags and keywords that you pre-select into the meaning and intent of a video, so you can search across your entire video archive and be instantly transported to the specific clip you were looking for at the specific timestamp. I know it sounds really expensive, but you can upload 10 hours for free and have deep search tech on your website if you just go to soar.com/deep search. Again, that's soar.com/deep search. SOAR.com/deep search. And hey, thanks for listening today. This is the AI to Uplift Humanity podcast.